Hello, my friends. I'm Dr. Tracy Lewis. Welcome to Victory Over Grief. This is going to be an exciting moment in your life. Trust me, your life will never be the same. You will have victory over grief. Hello, friends. I'm Dr. Tracy. Welcome to Session 4 of Victory Over Grief. We are well on our way to victory over grief and removing the pain and the loss that has entered our life and infiltrated our life and snatched away our peace and snatched away our hope. And we're well on our way to that process of removing the pain of those things so that we can live again. And not only that we can live again, but that we can continue to live and be happy and find wholeness in our life. And in order to do that, we still have 2 more lessons of understanding that we need to go through so that we can fully complete this process, not only effectively, but continually in our lives and walking out our victory every day for the rest of our lives. Doesn't that sound wonderful? In order to do that, we have to get understanding. One of the things that we come to understand and come to know in the Word of God, in Psalm chapter 1, we are likened as human beings to a tree. And so I'm going to use that analogy today, and I'm going to help you hopefully to understand some important concepts and core values for your system of belief that will help you to navigate through the enemies such as grief that enter into your life, enemies like fear and discouragement. And so there are many enemies that you'll be able to conquer once you gain understanding in these things. So in Psalm chapter 1, we're told we shall be, if we delight in the things of God and the knowledge of God, we shall be like a tree that is planted by the rivers. And we're going to talk about the 8 rivers of wholeness in this series. But today we're going to talk about the tree a little bit and the core and the fruit of that tree. You shall be like a tree that's planted by the rivers, who will bring forth fruit in its season. And we also know that fruit will not fail. In other scriptures, it tells us that that tree will also provide leaves of healing, and those leaves will not wither. And all that we do will prosper. And so don't you want to be like a tree? Don't you want to understand the concepts that will help you to remain strong? Well, one of the things we're going to talk about today is the core value and the core principles and standards of your belief system that are so vitally important to remain in a position and in a posture of victory in your life as a person. So that is what we're here for, right? To get victory over an enemy that came in. And we want to help you to understand why that enemy we call grief entered in or penetrated the walls and the absolute virtues of your life and your capacity. And that's what core is about. Core is about capacity. Have you ever heard someone say, I just don't have the ability to handle all of this. This is more than I can bear. And then people love to use that little scripture to reply back to that. Well, God will never give you more than you can bear. Well, bearing has to do with capacity. Bearing has to do with quotient. And quotient and capacity are very much the same. We have to understand that there are things that work together for our good. There are things that many times in the Christian community are ignored and are unaddressed. In the physical community are unaddressed. In the financial community are unaddressed. In the therapeutic community are unaddressed. And so if we don't put all those things together, those things that were created to bring purpose and fullness and wholeness to our life, and we only focus on one thing. Remember, I told you grief is not spiritual, it's emotional. And so we have to look at the aspects of emotional health. And in the faith community and in the Christian community, many times we don't want to talk about emotions. We want to deny emotions, but emotions are very real and we need to embrace them. We need to understand them. And also in the health society, fitness society, people will say, well, as long as you get well and healthy, you'll be happy. Well, if your emotional wholeness isn't in place, if your spiritual wholeness is in place, if your mental wholeness is in place, no matter how physically strong you are and healthy you are, you won't be happy and you won't be fulfilled. And the same goes with financial. Just because you have money doesn't make you happy and it doesn't make you whole. So we have to acknowledge that this tree that we are becoming has a root system, and that root system is planted by rivers, 8 rivers of wholeness. And like I said, we'll get into those in a future session. But today we're going to talk about the core. We're going to talk about what your tree is able to hold, the capacity that you're able to hold. We're going to talk about core values. We're going to talk about how your tree cannot bear fruit without the proper nutrients and without the proper core. That fruit that you have cannot remain. And God wants fruit to remain in your life. In fact, everything that He does, He says that the fruit will remain if He's in it. So we want the fruit of happiness, the fruit of peace, the fruit of understanding, the fruit of living a life healthy and whole to remain in your life. So are you ready to take this venture today to understand why you say the words, I just can't handle this? The reason you say those words, and I say those words, is because we need our capacity enlarged. And we also need to understand that we need more than one capacity. There are those 8 rivers of wellness and wholeness, but there are 4 core ones that we're going to discuss in this session today. What is a core? A core is the central part that holds everything else together. I'll give you an example of an apple. An apple has within inside of it a core. And that core has 4 sides to it. If we were to cut an apple open and we were to be able to see the inside of it, or after you eat an apple, you see that the apple has four sides to it. It's got a core. And inside that core are the seeds or the potential for fruit. Let me say that again. A seed is potential for fruit. But the core is the thing that holds it all together. Without that core inside the apple, there would be no place to store its potential to bear more fruit. And there would also be an inability for it to be firm and strong and hold up into a round shape. Okay, so everything else of the apple, the fruit, the skin, is built around the core. We pay more attention to the outer layers. We pay more attention to the fruit than we do how the fruit was sustained and how it was able to be there for us to enjoy. And that goes back to the core. So we're going to talk about the 4 Qs, the 4 quotients. We could even call them the 4 Cs, the 4 capacities, or the 4 core values that make life possible to bear good fruit. Isn't that exciting? So what are quotients and what are capacities? What are these 4 Qs? The IQ, the EQ, the RQ, and the AQ. Every one of these quotients help hold everything else together. But before I talk about that, let me give you just a little deeper thought about the apple. Now, you have an apple and you eat it. And inside of it, you find this core. Those walls are around something that you have to open up. And inside there, you find, in most apples, somewhere between 2 and 6 seeds. Now, inside that seed is the potential, inside every seed, is the potential to bear something. Do you know what it is? Inside this little bitty seed is the ability or the potential of another apple tree. And inside that apple tree, once that tree grows, it has the ability to grow anywhere from 200 to 400 apples if it's healthy and thriving. That means that inside of every healthy apple is a minimum of 2 to 6 seeds. So that particular one apple has the ability to plant 6 more apple trees. And those 6 apple trees have the potential now, not the ability without putting them in their proper place and utilizing them, but they have the potential, they have the capacity, they have the quotient of a very forest on the inside of them. If you take 6 apple trees and say they bear 400 apples each, right? You've got a chance to plant 2,400 or you have a chance to bear 2,400 minimum apples. And those 2,400 minimum apples times, let's just say in the middle, 4 seeds, you have the ability to grow a forest of apple trees. Wow. That's how God sees your life. Inside of you are the seeds of your destiny. In fact, Ecclesiastes 4:11 says, or 3:11, one of the two, says that God has placed the seed, are you ready, of eternity in the heart of man. Now, can you even begin to fathom or imagine what the potential of the word eternity is? And yet, while you're on this earth, He gives you destiny. He gives you purpose. Inside of you is a quotient, a capacity for greatness. And there are many seeds on the inside of you, and we liken those to gifts and abilities. In fact, the Word of God says that we've each been given graces and abilities and gifts. And we've all been given a plan and a purpose, not to harm us, but to prosper us in every way. Now, I know you're probably sitting there thinking, why doesn't this person start talking about grief? That's what I came to this group for. What I want you to know is this has to do with grief. You're not going to be able to store the quotients and the capacity to manage pain unless you understand where your core system of belief came from and how to develop it. And if it's lacking, how to increase it, right? So I told you the 4 Qs, the 4 quotients or capacities for greatness. These are the core values that we must have in order to build a healthy root system and in order to allow the rivers to flow in and out of our life and bring balance to the tree so that we bear healthy fruit that produces not only our own purpose and our own destiny. Are you ready? But we continue in legacy building. And we build a legacy in these 8 rivers and in these quotients and capacities, and we impart them and we deposit them into our children, and we begin to plant seeds and wellness into our family, and our generations after us don't suffer the grief and the pain that this one enemy, grief, has done and stolen in our own life. But we will be restored, we will be renewed, we will be increased, and we will have capacity to hold, and we will never again have to say, this is more than I can handle. But we will recognize we have to dig down into our roots and into our waters, and we can begin to feed in on the things that are necessary from our Heavenly Father to sustain us and to become a fruitful tree whose fruit will not fail, and it will bear in its season, and whose leaves will not wither, but will provide healing for everyone around them. Oh, that's so exciting. And that's where you're going to be when you begin to engage in this process. So in all you're getting, get understanding today about these quotients. So let's go into these quotients and capacities. But before we do that, let's just talk about our enemy. What is an enemy? An enemy is something that comes in to take over or to weaken and do harm to specific areas. And so in order to have victory over and conquer an enemy, we have to have a strategy, we have to have a battle plan, we have to understand our enemy well so that we can sufficiently and effectively rule and reign over and take victory over. So grief is something that came in to weaken you and harm you. How did it penetrate you? How did it get in? What things did you not do to remain watchful and to remain strong, that you would not allow your enemy to conquer you. In fact, when your enemy grief came, you would reject it, you would fight against it and remove it before it ever took any, are you ready? Root. Okay, so once a root of an enemy takes place, it begins to infiltrate other areas of our life until it completely takes over our life. So victory is the act. Say that with me, the act. Victory is the act of defeating an enemy or foe. And once we identify our enemy, we can reach for our forces and we can subdue and conquer that enemy once and for all. Grief unresolved enters in with destructive forces in a person's life. And so we must understand, we have taught you and we have explained to you what grief is, that it's a natural, normal reaction to a loss, an end of a thing, and the change in familiar patterns of behavior. It is extended in the different losses of our life that cause and bring grief in, and we define those losses. So now we know who our enemy is, and now we're going to have strategy on why he got in and how to keep him out for the rest, you hear me, the rest of our lives. So today we're only going to talk about core number 1. It's going to take our entire session to really get into these 4 cues and to help you understand that those 4 quotients and capacities are where seeds of greatness and seeds and cores of victory are held. And this brings about our capacity for wholeness. Instead of our capacity for depression, our capacity for suicide, our capacity for homelessness and broken relationships and sadness and sorrow, we're going to build a capacity for victory, for hope, for strength, and to remove pain out of our lives once and for all. You say, that's not even possible. Oh yes, my friend, it is possible. Did you know that there is a center to your existence? And that center is called your core identity. And when we enter this world, everything we will be, everything that we will engage in and accomplish and fulfill and walk out is already on the inside of our spirit being in seed form. And these seeds have the potential to grow many trees. Trees of stability, trees of gratitude, trees of happiness and peace, trees of contentment and joy, trees of sustainability and hope, trees of wisdom and trust. Many, many trees, my friend. Your personal potential is absolutely endless or eternal if you know how to plant those seeds properly and you know how to engage in the nutrients necessary to help your tree to grow. Many apples have cores full of seeds that are thrown away and potentials are never planted. I hope that that is not what you do with your life, my friend. I hope that you take all of the opportunities, all of the capacities, and all of the abilities that are within you and cause them to be multiplied and build the legacy that God intended for you to do. Because the potential that you have, I'm speaking to you, the potential that's in you is limitless. There are no limits to your capacity, to your abilities. Every time you plant your capacity and your ability, it multiplies into something greater. Wow. So let's get into the dimensions of the core of your identity, those things that determine the level of your capacity. Number 1 is the IQ. What is the IQ? What is that I quotient? It is our intelligence quotient. Gaining knowledge and understanding about life, about all the things that we have need of and fulfilling our maximum capacity of knowledge to be able to overcome and have victory over grief is an important part of our I quotient. On our journey of victory over grief and our process of recovery from our losses, there are many different things that we have to embrace. So far in these sessions, you have been embracing your I quotient, the knowledge that you need. You've also been embracing some other quotients that we'll talk about as we go along. But you have been embracing your intelligent quotient, and you have been increasing your capacity to hold knowledge about your enemy grief. When we ignore any one of the 4 Qs or the 4 capacities that build the core of our identity and our capacity for wholeness and health, we can often be blindsided and lose ground simply because we didn't know how to focus and how to fight. When we approach our plan of victory, we also must understand that in this core identity, we also are composed of 3 parts in our humanness. We are a spirit, we have a soul, which encompasses our mind, our will, and our emotions, which is our thoughts, our feelings, and our desires. And we are housed, or we live inside a body. And in order to live completely whole, we must address all 3 parts of our being. That's why we can't just look at things from a spiritual standpoint. We can't just look at things from a physical standpoint or from an emotional standpoint. The 3 things must work together to create balance. Say that with me. The 3 things must work together to create balance in my life. Knowledge is powerful, and the more we learn about our loss and how to overcome it and where it came from, the more able we will be to manage it well, to remove the pain, and to move on in life. And we will come to understand that unless knowledge is applied and knowledge is gained, we will not have the ample ability or capacity to do what is necessary to live free and to have victory. And no change will result. That is why we say, in order to obtain victory over grief, an action must be taken. The first action is that of learning, increasing our intellectual capacity. Another aspect of this intelligence is that we retrieve information and understanding about tools and methods and ways of doing things that will no longer be destructive or dysfunctional and be able to take us into healthy arenas instead of battered and torn places in our life where we experience more and even greater loss. When we look at our present loss, whether it be the death of a loved one, divorce, bankruptcy, and all these other things that we have spoken about, and not properly process all the things that are necessary, then our victory will be short-lived. I don't know about you, but I am not desiring, or any longer do I want short-term victory. I want complete victory forever. And that's what God has for us. What if I told you that you don't have to have short-lived victories anymore? What if I told you it doesn't have to happen to you like that, to have short-term victory after short-term victory and constantly go back and forth and have steam coming out of your life, right? Those satisfying, temporary, external adjusting moves like gambling and pornography and addiction and alcohol and depression. What if I told you those no longer have to be necessary in your life, because as you empty the pot and as you have the capacity to hold pain long enough to remove it and get rid of it, that you don't have to ever live again in short-term victory. You can increase these inevitable odds, first by growing in the knowledge of God, growing in the knowledge of how your enemy has come in, growing in the knowledge about yourself and your core identity and your core worth, and growing in the knowledge of how to stand strong up and hold up under any adversity that comes. You can truly find victory if you will be brutally honest with yourself. So now that we've looked at this capacity for intelligence, it's a core value of our life. It's one of the things that are absolutely necessary. Have you ever met people who are very weak-minded, who are very will-minded? And what I mean by that, no matter what happens, as soon as the first desire is touched on or a craving happens, they're gone. And you say, why can't this person ever bear up under it? The first time money's in their hand, they spend it. They're not able to, they don't have the capacity to save. The first time someone gets in a relationship, within months, they break up and they have repetitive, destructive behaviors and relationships. And you say, why can't this person ever stay committed to anyone? Why don't they have the capacity to love? Maybe you have people in your life who didn't have the capacity to love you, didn't have the capacity to trust you, didn't have the capacity of faith to believe, because they didn't look at the core values that are necessary, and they didn't gain knowledge that would keep them strong. So our intellectual quotient is vitally important to our ability for wholeness and victory in our life. Now let's look at the second quotient. The second quotient is our EQ, our emotional capacity. What is the depth and what is the level of your emotional capacity? Whenever anybody tries to correct you, when anybody tries to bring about any kind of instruction, do you emotionally begin to weep and cry or get defensive or refuse to hear what another person has to say? That says that there is something lacking in your emotional capacity. When someone enters into your life and they ask you to commit to them or become a friend with them, is there something in the back of your mind or something that stops you or causes you to self-sabotage that relationship because there is this core value of belief in your belief system that they're just going to hurt you like everyone else? That says that your emotional capacity is lacking. Our emotional capacity encompasses our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors that respond to those thoughts and those feelings. It also encompasses our desire, our will. Have you ever heard someone say, I just give up? Nothing's ever going to go right for me. Capacity in that person is emotional. And in their emotional capacity, their thoughts, their feelings, and their desires are very shallow. And they can't stand up under pressure. Many people have lots of head knowledge, but they have no understanding of their emotional well-being or their capacity in their emotional quotient. This may be the very reason why grief and loss took its toll on you, because even though you had head knowledge, your emotional capacity was lacking the ability because of your thoughts and your feelings and your desires being inundated with other loss and other pain and broke down, so that when something new came on the scene, you were not emotionally able to bear up under it because your capacity was low. Do you know that your thoughts and your desires are often controlled by your feelings? It is my belief that if people worked more fervently on removing pain and working on their losses from the inside out, their life would be far better. Because addressing our true feelings and emotions is very necessary in order for our capacity for emotional wholeness to grow. We must acknowledge our feelings. We must talk about our feelings. We must address our feelings. We must take them captive and line them up with facts. And then our desires will literally change. Our desire to give up will become a desire to keep moving. Our desire to become angry will become a desire to solve the problem. We live in a society that demands perfection, but I believe that perfection will never take place. We must just keep working on our performance and our progress. May I submit to you that progress, not perfection, is a sure way to victory. And unfortunately, our cultural vacuum doesn't allow people time to process, doesn't allow people time to manage their emotions well. So we have to be purposeful. We have to begin to look at our own emotional capacity, our own emotional quotient, and ask ourselves the question, how am I really feeling about this? And look inside of ourselves and begin to address how we really feel and manage that well, so that our capacity to handle our problem and our loss will also be increased. So we've got to be brave, and we've got to embrace our own self-care. We have to embrace our self-care in moments of struggle, regardless of what other people think about it. We have to begin to take authority and begin to acknowledge this place of our EQ and make sure that our EQ is strong. Not only our IQ, our intelligence quotient, but our EQ must also be strong. And the way it becomes strong is by acknowledgement of our feelings and emotions and speaking them out and communicating them. First, reflecting on them in our own self and becoming self-aware. And secondly, in making choices about communicating how we are feeling. Self-care is what whole people do to manage their emotional health, their mental health, and their physical well-being. I mean, we've already discussed in a past session that when loss is not addressed and the pain of that loss and the emotional effects that it has on us are not spoken about and are not acknowledged, that it will either create dysfunctional behaviors and destructive behaviors in our life and compulsive behaviors in our life and defective character traits, or it will affect our physical body. So our EQ is very important in the aspects of all of our life to obtain victory. We must be emotionally whole, emotionally full. It is a combination of our intellect and self-care of our emotions that begin to build a strong core of our identity, our worth, our value, and give meaning to our life. Self-awareness and transparency into truth is what brings about victory. In a nutshell, self-care is a part of our preservation of our own wholeness. We call this proactive healthy behaviors, PHB, proactive healthy behaviors, to continue to remain whole. And our wholeness depends on this activity. Many people are unaware of just how broken they are emotionally. They're too focused on just gaining knowledge to try and keep their emotions under, or get involved in physical things just to help them forget about their emotions. And their emotional brokenness is the very thing that allowed the enemy of grief to creep in. I hope that you will acknowledge that God Himself is the healer of your heart, and He is the one that can repair broken places in your life. And groups and gatherings just like this are the agents for those healings to be able to flow into you. So I'm glad you're here, because today God wants you to see and recognize that part of the way your enemy got in, part of the way that grief took over, is you were not emotionally healthy enough to handle this particular loss. And the losses that you already were carrying were never addressed. So your capacity of your EQ was empty. But here's the good news. Your shame and your suffering were carried to Calvary. The ability for you to become whole was already paid for. To put the gas of emotional wholeness in your tank, you don't have to pay anything. It was paid for you. And God said He's the God of all comfort. He's the Father of mercies. and He is able to comfort you in such a way that once you become clear, once your capacity becomes whole, you are going to overflow to other people with the same comfort that He has given you. And you'll be able to be strong for your family members. You'll be able to help others through the grieving process because your capacity in your emotions is whole and healthy. Isn't that awesome? And don't forget, we've been given another promise that although weeping endures for the night, joy does come in the morning. Your joy is on the way. I want you to say that. As my emotional capacity increases, my joy is on the way. I want you to say that. As my emotional capacity increases, my joy is on the way. What am I trying to say to you? I'm trying to tell you that pain does not have to remain. Feelings of loss, feelings of discouragement can become temporary in your life and can be quickly removed. In fact, we're told that we can be given beauty for ashes, strength for fear, gladness for mourning, and peace for despair. And though feelings are temporary, if we allow them to remain, they can become toxic. We must address them, or they will not only become toxic in our own lives, but they will become toxic to other people around us, and they will also cause the ability for us to bear fruit to be denied. Now, some of the feelings and emotions that you may not have addressed when it comes to your grief or your loss are feelings of feeling betrayed. Like it's just unfair and this shouldn't have happened. Feelings of injustice, feelings of fear, feelings of shame, feelings of anger, abandonment, rejection, self-worth and neglect, a lack of feeling secure and safe. So understand that repressing emotion decreases your capacity. And repressing emotions is like burying a person alive. And anything buried alive is coming back. It may not come back in the same shape or form that you left it, but it's coming back. And it's going to destroy something else. Let me give you an example. If you never allowed yourself to think about how you felt about some significant event in your life, maybe it was when you were 8 years old, your mother was taken away and put into jail and you went to foster care because your father was nowhere to be found. You suffered betrayal, rejection, abandonment, unfamiliar places. You might have experienced a whole lot of other things in that foster care system that we don't even need to open up and talk about today. But just that moment of loss and pain, when your mother failed you, when your mother left you, it was as if a hole in your heart entered that day and death took place in some kind of way and you experienced grief. Now, because you didn't address it and you just moved on in your life, you may not now understand that that emotional quotient, that emotional capacity that you never allowed to heal and you never addressed, now is the reason why you suffer with feelings of abandonment and mistrust of other people. And every time you start to dream about possibly doing something, you pull yourself back because every time you start to dream, you're afraid that something or someone will be taken from you. So you don't get yourself in a position where you would suffer that same feeling of emotional loss again. And so you live your life well guarded so that your relationships and all the things that you do don't warrant an opportunity for that emotion to be felt again. But then all of a sudden it happened out of nowhere without your control, and you are feeling those same feelings again, and your capacity to handle it is not there. Your inability to dream, your inability to trust, your fear of losing people, your self-sabotaging, and all of these dysfunctional behaviors that you're now experiencing don't really have to do with the current loss in your life. They have to deal with the loss that happened when you were 8 years old, where you stunted the ability for your emotional capacity to grow simply because you never talked about how that significant event or made you feel or ever acknowledged them to yourself. So the root of security, the root of the ability to hope, has never grown in your life. Here's another example. You may have had a significant event or traumatic event of being sexually assaulted by a family member during your childhood. Nobody talked about it. You never allowed yourself to feel. And now you're a mother of 2 beautiful children, but you won't let them go anywhere. You won't let them stay overnight for fear that someone might assault them. And what happens is their lack of ability to develop and grow in relationships and emotions is hindered because you don't send them outside of the home without you always being with them. And now the fear that you have, the emotions that you have become a dysfunctional behavior in the rearing of your own children, and the things that they need to sustain them in life, to become able to discern situations, to be able to be independent and able to acknowledge their own feelings and emotions. You do it for them, and they will become bankrupt in their emotional capacity to handle loss if you continue in that pattern of behavior. But it's happening because of your emotional quotient needing to be enlarged and addressed. In fact, maybe one of your children is having behavioral issues whenever it comes to being in a setting with another child that seems more dominant or more powerful than them, and they're being bullied. Maybe your other child is the bully and is becoming a problem in that capacity. Or your child is isolating and having all kinds of internal behaviors and living in a place of torment. And due to their lack of socialization, they found themselves having wedding accidents and being ostracized and laughed at by other children. And all of that is because they are repressing feelings that they have and insecurities and fears that they have. And all these things, my friend, go back to, instead of you saying, what am I doing wrong as a parent? What in me is producing this fruit in my seed? What things have I not addressed that are causing me to sow a seed in my child that's bringing about and producing fear, shame, insecurity, anger, and all of these other kinds of behaviors that you might be seeing in your troubled child? You may not realize that the things your own child is experiencing are from your past roots of safety not being addressed. Perhaps you went through a rough divorce, and the person you're dating now isn't even able to get you to say, I love you back, because you don't believe anybody could ever really love you, and that everyone has another ulterior motive in their love for you. In fact, when they tell you they love you, in the back of your mind you say, sure you do. But I'm not going to count on that, because if I do, I might lose it. And I can't afford, or I don't have the emotional capacity for my heart to be broken again. So you make this internal decision to never allow your capacity to be increased to the place that you would ever be able to love or trust someone again. And your belief system now, your core belief system, has been formed to believe that all love leads to pain. Can you see right now that all these life issues that you are struggling with, pain and loss and grief, are connected to emotional wellness? Had you dealt with emotional losses when you were young? Had you received proper understanding and knowledge when you were young, how to navigate through the pain of that loss, that you would not have all of the pain that you have today with these new losses and these new situations in your life? They are all a result of emotions left unfinished. And now that you have this inner struggle going on, you're repeating behaviors of your past, or you're experiencing new dysfunctional behaviors. There's a torment going on in your mind that is greater than your ability to manage. So now you are grabbing for substances. The steam is beginning to take place. And instead of shutting out the voices in your head, you're beginning to numb them with alcohol, with drugs, with other sensual gratifications. And you're experiencing even more real loss before you even knew what was happening. So today, I hope you can understand in this cue number 2 of your core, emotional well-being and your emotional quotient is so vitally important to your ability to manage and remove pain and loss, that you will become aggressive in attacking and addressing and acknowledging your feelings and emotions, not only from what's going on today now, but the things that have happened in your past. It's almost time to take that action. I hope you know that emotional pain needs to be felt, it needs to be processed, and it needs to be removed through communication, because it can become a ticking time bomb, ready and willing to sabotage your happy life. So, what do you need to work on? What do you need to address concerning your mind, your thoughts, your will, your desires, or your emotions, your feelings? This is an important question that must be answered in order to increase your emotional quotient. Okay, now that we've talked about IQ and we've talked about EQ, now we're going to talk about RQ. Do you know what it is? That's right. Your relational quotient. If we don't have our IQ and our EQ strong and healthy, it will begin to affect our relational quotient or our relational capacity. Our relational capacity is our ability to make friends, to enter into long-term relationships, to be able to sustain relationships, to have quality relationships, healthy and whole relationships, and not live in the comfort of relational chaos. Relationships that are formed that are unhealthy are relationships such as dependency, codependency, narcissism, rudeness, isolation. And these things tend to become our normal, and we become comfortable in chaotic relationships. But these types of relationships leave us feeling unloved, unworthy, aggravated, irritated, unfulfilled, and truly unhappy. So once you have understanding and knowledge, and you begin to focus on your emotional capacity, it is then that your relationships can change from dysfunctional ones to healthy, happy, and whole ones with mutual trust, interdependency, mutual respect and help for one another, joy and fulfillment, peace and happiness. Isn't that the kind of relationships that you want? Don't you want to have the capacity to be able to enjoy life with others and to walk alongside of others without fear, without envy, without resentment, without unforgiveness, without comparison, without feeling less than? All these types of things that you feel in your lack of capacity in relationships have a lot to do with you not managing your understanding and intelligence about relationships and what a healthy relationship looks like, and your emotional wellness. But once you do, you can have healthy relationships too. And you will keep them and you will guard them and you will protect them, and they will have proper and healthy wholeness and boundaries, and you will enjoy the life that you live in and around other people. And you will actually say, I like people. Because there are some of you out there today that say, I don't even like people. I don't want to be around anyone. I don't think there's a person on the planet who's real, who's genuine, and who can be trusted. I feel sorry for you if that is the level of your RQ. Because these types of relationships and these types of perceptions about relationships only bring more pain and destruction to a person's life. And they will destroy the very fabric of your own self-worth and self-esteem. So as you're beginning to see, I think, that these core values, these core systems of belief are all intertwined together. IQ, EQ, and now RQ. And in our process of victory over grief, many people feel vulnerable and they seek out quick remedies in relationships that don't benefit them in the long run and only leave them feeling more lost than when they were first started. And people will navigate or gravitate or choose the wrong relationships at the wrong seasons and the wrong times in their life for the wrong reasons. Perhaps that's happened to you, and guess what happens from there? More pain and loss. People join in relationships not due to mutual trust or love, but due to a last-ditch effort to try and find some place of wholeness. Because of the fear of not being able to handle their own situations and their own feelings, they join someone else to their mess, hoping to draw some kind of strength from another person, some kind of capacity from another person. But what really happens is they drain that other person, and that person becomes resentful, and the relationship fails. And unfortunately, this line of reasoning in the way that you make and keep and disconnect and connect with other people will only continue in a vicious cycle of loss and disillusionment and unhappiness in your life. So before we can establish healthy relationships and increase the capacity of our relationship quotient and gain victory over the grief that we are dealing with right now, let me ask you this. Is some of the grief that you're feeling and some of the loss and the pain that you're feeling connected to some type of relationship? Maybe with a narcissistic parent who just died, maybe with an abusive husband who you just left, maybe the sadness and the depression that you feel from a poor choice that you made and a child that you lost. Relationship is connected to loss, my friend. In order to have healthy relationships, we have to understand that head knowledge does not fix heart problems. Heart problems are fixed through emotional wholeness, and then head knowledge and heart knowledge can increase our relational capacity. So we've got to deal with past relationships and the pain of them in order to engage in healthy, whole, new relationships and not continue to experience more and more tragedy, more and more loss. I don't believe it's God's intention for us to go through 3, 4, and 5 marriages in order to find wholeness and break other people down and ourselves along the way. So I'm trying to give you a key that will help you become whole relationally, emotionally, and intellectually, that will help you to remove the enemy of pain and keep the enemy of pain from re-entering your life over and over and over again. And that grief will no longer have root in your relationships. Perhaps your struggle with dysfunctional behaviors, compulsive disorders, insignificant relationships, even addiction or behavioral problems all go back to one relational issue of your father leaving you when you were 7 years old, or your mother dying when you were age 18, or your family being torn apart by divorce when you were 12. You see, all of those things have to do with the relationship with someone. Your father, your mother, your spouse, your mother and your father's relationship with one another. These relationships with significant pain and loss that were never addressed and were left incomplete. And though you finally don't want to feel that way anymore, you don't address what losses those relationships brought into your life. And so what you try and do is when you enter into a relationship, you try and do better than what you lost and improve. As you look at those things and you see what you lost, you try and overcompensate by getting closer to your husband and not letting him out of your sight so that divorce won't take place. Again, another dysfunctional behavior has been born. You think, if I stay health conscious and I eat all the right things and I don't do the same things that my mother did, then I won't die an early death. And you become compulsive in your behavior over health and nutrition to the point that everyone else is impacted. All because you won't deal with the emotional pain that took place when your mother died at an early age due to a health issue. And now you live in the fear of dying early. And that fear drives so many compulsive behaviors. And you don't get close to anyone in a relationship because you might die early and you don't want them to suffer the pain of that kind of loss. Why? Because you've never removed it. And you carry it with you into every relationship you have. You don't get close to anyone just in case, because you don't want to hurt them if you leave out early. And then in light of your parents' divorce when you were young, no matter how hard you try, life just stays hard. You can't find happiness. You can't find peace. You have 2 beautiful children, but you can't seem to enjoy their presence in your life because the 4 main rivers of wholeness, of loyalty and wisdom and trust and patience are not in you. You don't have that relational capacity to be able to give to your family and to your spouse. They are all either absent or very minimal due to the untruth you have told yourself that you have dealt with the pain of your past by doing better than what you had. That's a lie, my friend. Doing better never fixes pain. It never removes pain. It becomes a controlling way to live, to keep everything in place so that no more pain comes. And this temporary gratification that you're fighting for every day will never equal healthy and whole relationships or the contentment of them. I know that I'm challenging you today to take in a significant amount of information about these capacities and quotients that keep every person and every human being whole. But they are vital core components to your system of belief, to your ability to reach your fullest capacity. You must know, you must feel, you must understand in order to handle. So that's Q1, Q2, and Q3. Know, feel, understand in order to bear, which is quotient or Q number 4, our AQ. What is your AQ? Your AQ is your adversity quotient, the place where loss takes place. From just this little discussion that we've had so far, maybe you might begin to understand the loss of your family member through death, the divorce of your parents you experienced almost 20 years ago, the divorce you went through 7 years ago, the loss of your job 2 years ago, the move back home 1 year ago, and how They are all still impacting your life today. It's bigger than you think. Grief and this enemy has been infiltrating you over and over again until your capacities were depleted and your ability to bear up under them was not sufficient enough to remove pain. And one grief that binds us in our ability to grow in our capacity as far as relationships are concerned. And one of the things that we do is we forget to love ourselves. We forget to value our own worth. And we also, our relationship with ourselves is often damaged by these types of things that take place in our life. I want you to have healthy and whole relationships. I want them to be the very roots that hold your life together. I think about in many cultures that the only times that families often gather are at funerals or weddings. Is that the kind of relationship and the depth of relationships that you really want? That you only come together at significant high moments of loss or high moments of celebration? Or do you want to have continual relationships that are ongoing and supportive and fruitful at all times? With your family members, with your loved ones, with your friends, not living in isolation and feeling alone, feeling supported, feeling celebrated. These are things that God created relationship to be, that we would find camaraderie, that we would find confidants, and that we would find comrades in our relationships. And we would find people who are for us. We would find people who are for what we're for and people who are against what we're against. We would find that place of unity and strength in that unity, and we will find a community of wellness and wholeness. And that's really what it's all about. And that's really what God wants you to have. And your inability to have that is because your quotients or your capacities or the core things that hold your life together are depleted and are lacking. This leads us to quotient number 4, the adversity quotient. This is the last one we're going to discuss today. I know this session has been a little bit long, and so will our next one, but they're vitally important to your emotional health. And unfortunately, these things have been ignored in our society and our culture, and that is why our culture is such a mess, in my opinion. So one thing you have to understand when it comes to our AQ being our adversity quotient. How does life go with you when the fire comes, when the trouble hits, when life hits you right between the eyes? Your adversity quotient. And your capacity and your adversity quotient will always go back to the foundation of the IQ, the EQ, and the RQ. Before adversity quotient can rise to the capacity needed to work through every situation, every trial, and every test, and every hardship, and every place of brokenness, you have to build these other 3 parts of your core for your adversity quotient to be complete. Adversity pertains to the difficulties and situations and circumstances that arise unexpectedly in a person's life and through the process of living. None of us know how many troubles we will have to face, how many hardships we will have to endure, how many trials we will have to overcome. That is a variable that is always going to be unknown to us. So we always have to have enough capacity to face adversity. Have you ever seen a person you say, man, that person is so weak? Their adversity, their ability to handle and manage a problem. Well, the problem they have is nothing compared to the problems I'm dealing with right now. In other words, you're saying my adversity quotient and capacity is far greater than theirs. What's wrong with this person? Well, it all goes back to the other 3, the IQ, the EQ, and the RQ. Grief comes as a result from the weight of adversity that arises in the average person's life, and they are not able to bear up under it, manage it well, or have a proper foundation on how to navigate through it. It could be the loss of a job, a business closing down, a child dying, a family issue, a car note, a car accident, a custodial case, losing an important item, child support issues, other significant issues where support is needed, even a person being released from prison, the suspension off of a job, the suspension of a license, a house catching on fire, an eviction notice, the death of a close friend, divorce papers being served, a health condition arising, the health condition of a family member arising, a child having trouble in school or with the law, a spouse being unfaithful, and the list goes on. But these are a few of some of the things that I have seen take people into places of disillusionment and inability to manage and get back up in life. Our adversity quotient is tried by anything that causes a person not to feel in control or emotionally able to handle a specific situation or circumstance, or take on the responsibility it entails to complete a task. I want you to remember that unaddressed issues in your past will cause reoccurring problems in your future. Let me say that again. Unaddressed issues in your past will cause reoccurring problems in your present. Here's the real dilemma. I can give you all the answers, but we never know what someone's adversity quotient really is or their capacity to manage it well until the problem takes place. The problems have to take place to be able to understand whether or not you're able to bear up under them. And if you're not able to bear up under them, you must go back and look at the other three core principles that will help maintain your life and see where the emptiness is. This is why knowledge, emotional wellness, and healthy relationships with people, mentors, and authority figures, as well as family bonds, is essential to one's wholeness and one's ability to face issues head on. In these moments, if the knowledge that we have acquired through learning and growth of our intellect as well as our emotional well-being are addressed, and the relationships that are vital for our support in times of need are well kept and identified and whole, then we can find grief to be our best friend. And in times of adversity, we will be able to bear up under anything. Victory comes from being able to bear up under everything. We can silently watch our fears, our inhibitions, our disillusionments, and even our temptations and vulnerabilities bow at our feet and find strength from within to weather the storm. What a great moment this can become for a person who is experiencing adversity, seeking out victory, and to watch them bear up under and navigate through loss and pain, and navigate through things they've never experienced in the past because they dealt with the problems of their past, is awesome to be a witness of. And from these things, we can begin to be the best version of ourselves that we could ever be. And we can help others accomplish just the same. Because when you heal your own relationships, when you address your own emotions, then you will, without even recognizing it, without even realizing it, through the way that you speak, the way that you conduct your life, the way that you perceive life, be able to build a legacy for those around you and that are a part of your life to do just the same. There's another promise that we must embrace, that God said He would never leave us, He would never forsake us, and He would never allow us to be alone, that He's always with us. He will give you the power and the courage and the love to mend all these broken places so that your capacity in all of them is able to grow, that you'll open up your mind to greater understanding. You'll open up your heart to greater truth and healing. You'll open up your relationships to trust and ability to love fully. And you'll be able to face every and conquer every storm. So, what is the level of your core center of identity? Are you an apple that has no supportive foundation inside of you to be able to have seeds of capacity within you to do all that God intended for you to do and live a life that is meaningful and purposeful? Perhaps you need to start today rebuilding your core. You see, your arms can be strong, your legs can be strong, your mind can be strong, but if you don't have the core of your body strong, your body won't be strong. If you don't begin to build the core centers of your identity through your understanding and gaining knowledge, through your emotional wholeness and sharing how you feel and reflecting and assessing your feelings for real, and beginning to mend and repair relationships with the knowledge and the emotional health that you have, you will never have victory over grief. But if you will restore and you will begin to build your core, then your thoughts will change, your feelings will be in control, your emotions will not lead you, your choices will be better, your perspective will be better, your happiness level will increase because you're increasing your capacities of your IQ, your EQ, your RQ, and now your AQ. You can face every problem right on. Well, that's the end of our session today. I hope it's helped you, and we'll discuss these things in our conversation group this week. And I want you to think deeply about these things and what part of your capacity is lacking. And maybe all 4 of your capacities have an empty tank, and it's time for you to get those things built so that in the coming weeks, you can remove the pain that has hindered you, and you can have a strong core that will keep you all the way through to the end of your journey in this life. I hope you'll join us for session number 5, where we're going to look at the second core value or strength to victory. Today we looked at the 4 Qs. Next week we're going to look at the 10 things that every human needs in order to be whole and happy and free, so that grief will never take hold of you. You will have victory over grief.